The Galactic Research Consortium Station VLAN 7 was not designed for humans. Nobody had asked it to be. Dr. Kale Veyron, the Velthary research director with 4 degrees and a reputation that preceded him across 6 star systems, had made that abundantly clear the morning Mara Ellison first stepped through the airlock. He had looked at her the way most aliens looked at humans, the way a scientist looks at a mislabeled specimen. Curious. Slightly alarmed. Waiting for the mistake to reveal itself. Cadet Ellison, he had said, his secondary eyelids flickering in what Mara had later learned was the Velthary equivalent of a polite wince. Your species filed for observation clearance under the Deathworld fauna study exemption. I want to confirm, you understand this facility processes compounds that are lethal to most Class 3 and Class 4 biological organisms? Mara had smiled. It was the kind of smile her instructors back on Earth had learned to fear. Yes, sir, she said. I read the briefing. That had been 6 weeks ago. Today, the research wing smelled like burning ozone and something that Joe, the consortium's lanky, 4-armed lab coordinator, described as fermented regret. Mara didn't mind. She'd grown up in the Chilean Atacama, where the wind carried mining particulate and the soil had more heavy metals than a scrapyard. Her lungs had been making peace with hostile chemistry since she was 7 years old. Joe was scrolling frantically through a holographic display when Mara walked in, her standard-issue environment suit hanging open at the collar like a jacket she hadn't bothered to zip. You're late, Joe said, 3 of his 4 arms gesturing in the direction of an emergency status board that was currently lit up in 3 different shades of red. I was eating, Mara said. The consortium's funding review board arrives in 4 hours. I know. I still needed breakfast. Joe made a sound that his translation implant rendered as mournful resignation and went back to his display. The rest of the team was already assembled at the primary testing bay. Many, the consortium's chief toxin analyst, a compact, silver-skinned Druhari with 3 nervous eyes that darted independently, was standing over a sealed containment unit with the expression of someone watching a funeral. Beside her, the twin Orvithai technicians Dai and Hai were running diagnostics on the atmospheric processors, their bioluminescent markings dim with what Mara had come to recognize as stress. And at the far end of the room, almost hidden behind a wall of monitoring equipment, stood Wa, the youngest researcher on the team, barely out of her own species equivalent of graduate school, who had apparently not slept in 31 hours. Status? Mara asked. Many answered without looking up. The Cirith compound samples we synthesized for tomorrow's presentation degraded overnight. All 4 test batches. The molecular binding agents destabilized in the humidity fluctuation during the night cycle. Mara looked at the sealed containment unit. How bad? Bad enough that the review board will pull our funding if we can't demonstrate the stabilization protocol today. Live. In front of them. Many's third eye finally swiveled to look at her. The protocol that has only ever been tested on non-organic proxies. Silence. Wa raised her hands slightly. I want to note that I flagged the humidity calibration issue 2 weeks ago. Noted, said everyone simultaneously. Mara pulled her environment suit closed and sealed the collar. All right. Walk me through it. Dr. Kale Veyron arrived at 0900 to find Cadet Ellison standing inside the primary test chamber, which was not, he noted with some alarm, where cadets were supposed to stand. Ellison, he said carefully, what are you doing? Running the stabilization protocol, she said. That protocol involves direct exposure to Cirith compound derivatives, yes. She glanced at him through the reinforced viewport. Toxin threshold class 7 for most species. Joe pulled my biological profile. For humans, it's a class 3 irritant. Roughly equivalent to your standard industrial solvent. She paused. We used to clean engine parts with stuff like this back home. Kale stared at her. His secondary eyelids did the wince again. Cadet, the funding review board. Arrives in 3 hours and 40 minutes. Which gives me enough time to complete all 4 stabilization runs. She picked up the first sealed sample container with her bare hands. The insulated gloves had been deemed unnecessary after Joe's profile cross-reference, and looked at it with the calm, evaluating expression of someone who had spent her childhood cataloging which plants in her region could kill you and which ones just made you wish they had. You should probably stay on that side of the glass, Dr. Veyron. The aerosol dispersal in stage 2 is rough on Velthary respiratory tissue. Cale did not move. He would later admit to his research log, too stunned to move. The next 53 minutes were, by any measurable standard, extraordinary. Mara ran the first stabilization sequence on batch alpha, a sereth compound derivative that many had rated as inadvisable for organic contact in her official notes. The compound required precise temperature modulation during the binding phase, and the original protocol had called for robotic handling arms and a 2-day setup period. Mara did it by hand in 11 minutes. Her fingers, Joe would later note in his incident report, showed a mild surface reaction, the chemical equivalent of a light sunburn. She did not stop working. Batch beta was worse. The aerosol dispersal phase released a fine mist of a compound that Dye and High had classified as a threshold class 8 neurotoxin for standard oxygen breathers. Mara walked through it to reach the secondary modulation panel, adjusted 3 settings, and walked back out. "Are you all right?" Wa called from the observation deck, all 6 of her sensory filaments pressed flat against her skull in alarm. "Little tingly," Mara said, and moved to batch gamma. By the time she finished batch delta, the most complex of the 4, involving a 2-stage chemical marriage that had previously required a controlled environment and 3 separate handling protocols, the entire observation deck had gone completely silent. Cale was gripping the edge of the console. Many's 3 eyes were all pointing in the same direction for the first time Mara had ever witnessed. Even Dye and High had stopped their diagnostic chatter and were simply watching. Mara stepped out of the chamber. She pulled off her gloves, purely a formality, as it turned out, and looked at the clock on the wall. 58 minutes. 4 batches, she said. All stabilized. The binding integrity should hold for the presentation window. She looked at Cale. "You'll want to have many run the confirmation scans. Give the board something official to look at." Cale opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "You walked through a class 8 neurotoxin aerosol," he said. "MHM. Your species just tolerates that." Mara considered the question seriously. "I mean, I wouldn't do it every day. But Earth's a rough place, Dr. Veyron. You develop tolerances." She paused. "Also, the tingly feeling is kind of gone now, so I think I'm fine." From the observation deck, Wa made a sound that her translation implant rendered as existential recalibration. The funding review board arrived precisely on schedule. They were 5 senior consortium officials, each representing a different member civilization, each armed with ledgers and skeptical expressions and the specific energy of people who had already decided to be disappointed. Dr. Cale Veyron met them at the airlock. He was smiling. It was not an expression that came naturally to Velthary faces, and he had been practicing it in the corridor mirror for 10 minutes, because he had decided that this moment deserved one. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I believe you'll find our stabilization demonstration today somewhat ahead of schedule." He gestured toward the research wing, where 4 perfectly stabilized sereth compound batches were already displaying clean molecular scans on the monitoring boards, and where Mara Ellison was sitting on a lab bench eating a protein bar and explaining to a fascinated what exactly how Earth children learned to identify toxic plants by smell. "The human did it," Joe confirmed helpfully to the nearest board member, who had not asked but was staring at Mara through the viewport with an expression Mara recognized as the universal alien version of that should not be possible. She gave him a small wave. The funding was not cancelled that day. In fact, 3 of the 5 board members filed independent requests to expand the study's scope. Specifically, They wanted to know more about what else Deathworld biology could casually survive that the rest of the galaxy considered unsurvivable. Dr. Kale Veyron submitted the paperwork with a note attached that said, simply, "I recommend we ask Cadet Ellison. She seems to have opinions." She did. She always did.